New migration figures were released this week, and they could spell electoral disaster for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party. Net migration has reached a record high, and overall migration into the UK for 2022 stood at 606,000, up 24% on last year. Sorry, 600,000. Could this be an issue that seals a Labour landslide in the election next year? So here to discuss these figures and what they could mean for the government, I'm delighted to be joined by the Professor of Politics at the University of Kent, Matthew Goodwin. So, Matthew, now 606,000, it sounds like a lot.
It is a lot.
And I think a lot of people, particularly Conservative supporters, are saying that actually immigration is the area where the Conservatives have failed them the most. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think that's a fair assessment. These are the biggest numbers that we've really had. They're about 3 times as large as when David Cameron came into office in 2010. They're considerably larger than before the COVID pandemic, and this really blows apart the Conservative Party's claim, you might remember Boris Johnson making this claim in 2019, to lower the overall numbers. But more than that, it also blows apart everything that Brexit was really about, which was taking back control. And for 2019 Conservative voters, you know, this isn't a fringe issue. This is their second top issue, and for all voters in the country, immigration is now their third most important issue behind things like the cost of living crisis and the National Health Service. So this is going to be enormous as we go into the election next year.
How can it be the case that the Conservatives, of all people, have dropped the ball on this one? Because they must have known that this was their priority in terms of their electoral base.
Yeah, so I think what's basically happened is the Conservative Party essentially is no longer really Conservative. It is in the hands of a socially liberal parliamentary party and a donor class that isn't really interested in delivering reform of migration. So what we've got is this political economy now that is based around importing low-skill workers from overseas, from outside of Europe, and plugging the holes in our economy. For example, the 5 million people now on welfare, the broken higher education system, low productivity, and we're using mass migration to essentially cover all of those problems within our economy. So the Conservatives now, I think, are going to face a reckoning next year, and that reckoning is going to come from the more working class, culturally conservative, older voters in places like the Red Wall who rallied around Boris Johnson because they thought they were going to get a different kind of economy. They thought they were going to get a different kind of settlement. And in the end, Andrew, what they've got is not just more of the same, but actually what we had before, but put on steroids.
So, I mean, a lot of people will say that part of the problem was that those people who were raising those concerns were basically dismissed as racists, when, of course, they were concerned about things such as wage depression and the impact on their communities. Is that a fair view of that?
Yeah, I mean, I always get in trouble on Twitter because I point this out, that if you look at every serious survey we have in this country, I'm a social scientist, I look at data, Britain has never had levels of racism as low as they are today. We are a remarkably tolerant, welcoming country.
And multiple studies have
yeah, I mean, this is beyond dispute. I mean, prejudice has never been lower, and so this really, you know, runs into the kind of core woke claim that you just heard Peter talking about, which is that ultimately all Western nations are institutionally racist and are consumed by prejudice. But actually Britain isn't like that. Where people have become concerned, and I think they've got good reason to feel concerned, is the political choices that are being made in Westminster. And I'll give you one example. So we're now spending £1.8 billion every year dealing with the effects of the crisis in the Channel, housing asylum seekers and illegal migrants in hotels. That is more money than we are spending levelling up the North West and North East and Yorkshire combined. So these political choices are having enormous effects. Mass migration is being used to prop up the higher education sector. It's being used to hide the fact we've got 5 million people on welfare, and it's being used, by the way, to bring in low-skilled workers on salary thresholds that are as low as 21,000, which is like 10 grand below the national average wage. So when Boris Johnson said to everybody, or the Conservatives today say to everybody, we're reshaping the country around high-skill migration, that's not true. They're not doing that at all. And this is really where I have a problem with the Conservatives, because they're not really reforming the economy in a way that we need them to reform the economy in order to deliver on the promise of what the last 10 years was really all about.
But is it not the case that there are some elements of society that do depend upon migration? I mean, the NHS is a very good example. It would pretty much collapse, wouldn't it?
Well, I'll give you one example with the NHS. Absolutely true. We do need some migration, but we probably don't need 606,000 net migration. Take the NHS. Part of the reason the NHS is in crisis is because for the last 10 years we've imported doctors from typically low-income countries while failing to expand the number of medical school places in Britain. So we turn away somewhere around 20,000, 30,000 applications from British kids who want to become doctors, basically because we say it's too expensive to create the medical places to get them into training. That is a political choice, Andrew, that the government, both left and right, have made in order to, again, rely on importing mass migration to conceal obvious problems in our economy.
Does the Conservative Party under Rishi Sunak recognise that this is a problem it will have to fix if it wants to stand any chance whatsoever in the next election?
So if you talk to people in and around number 10, they accept migration is a big problem. What I think worries some of them is that cabinet ministers have decided, I think, in my view and conversations and so on, that the real issue is the small boats, right? That it's not legal migration. If they fix the small boat problem, if they fix the illegal migration problem, this issue will go away. That's simply not the case. What we are going to see over the next 10 years, if we maintain numbers like this, is unprecedented pressure on the National Health Service, schools, environment, housing. I mean, we built 204,000 homes last year. On these migration numbers, Andrew, we're going to need to build 616,000 homes every year just to deal with the extra demand for migration. Not homes for British people, just to deal with the extra demand for migration. So can we just get real first in this conversation about what this is doing to our society? And voters aren't stupid, right? They can see through this. They can see what's actually happening. And so the Conservatives, I think, are going to be left in this very difficult situation next year and saying, we've given you control, right? We've begun to reduce the number of boats in the Channel, but I think lots of voters are going to be looking at Britain and saying, I don't feel like I have control. If anything, the pace of change is getting faster. If anything, the economy is not being fixed. If anything, both the Conservatives and Labour have gone back to this low growth, low productivity, high migration economy, which is exactly what they thought they were getting rid of when they voted for Brexit in 2016.
Matthew Goodwin, thanks so much for joining me.